All right. So welcome, friends, and delighted to welcome back Dave Sinis, a colleague from AST, and to continue a very interesting, very exciting conversation about multi-generational discipleship. And so I invite you to pray with me. Gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for those whom we have met, with whom we have been able to share your love and to receive love from them. We remember those who have been brought to our attention, either because we've heard stories about them or we know of their challenges, and ask that you bless them and ask that you bless us as we continue our work to grow as followers and disciples of you. Amen.
Mm.
Okay. Once again, Dave, we are in your hands.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be back. I have some slides. I just need to get set up. All right. So once again, we are going to be talking about intergenerational ministry, but we're going to focus on worship. One of the main things we do as communities of faith is worship together. So we're going to look at some different ways that uh, churches of all sorts of denominations and in different parts of the world are moving toward ways of worshiping that are truly inclusive of all ages and different abilities. And then we're going to actually try some out for ourselves as well. But before we get going, I'm just going to remind us a little bit of what we did, not the whole thing we did last week or 2 weeks ago, but remind us of a little bit. So we talked about different terminology, and I told the story of South Street Church and explained how throughout the years that they modeled different approaches to the ways that generations can or the way that they might or might not interact with each other. And the first one is when the generations are segregated or separated, or ministry might be, some people might use the term age-based, some people use monoculture or monogenerational, but essentially it means that people of different ages are separated from one another in what we do in church, simply because of their age, not for any other reason. It doesn't mean that every age, every generation is separate. You might have people from 25 and up worshiping together, and then you might have people who are children and teenagers in more age-based programming. Those that really differs based on how many people are in the church and how many people of each age are there. But for a long time, this has been kind of the de facto way that we have divided ourselves up in the church. And I'm not against age-based programming. I think it's really important. My concern is that it's in our muscle memory so much that it's hard to imagine other ways of doing things sometimes. Some churches start bringing the ages together in what we might call multi-generational ministry. You can see the quote here from Holly Allen and Chris Barnett. They say there's tolerance living alongside superficial and polite interaction. So the ages might be in the same room as each other. They might be together for meals or parts of worship. Um, but the community and the way the community works and what a church does to practice their faith together really hasn't been transformed too much, on account of those people who are not normally in, or who have not traditionally been part of it. If we go a little further, we get to cross-generational ministry. So you can see that, whereas in multi-generational, the Lego colors are they're together, but they're still, separated by color. Here, there's some more mixing. There's quite a bit of mixing, actually. And the quote says there's some sharing, listening, and learning, but little individual or collective transformation. So certainly, relationships continue to be formed. Churches might start taking some more concrete steps to help foster some relationships. But for the most part, a lot of what happens is it just sort of happens without much planning or necessarily without the intention or goal of that relationship building. But using our metaphor here, if all those Legos of different colors that certainly are together were put together with more intentionality, we end up with intergenerational ministry, where there's comprehensive mutuality, equality, and reciprocity that makes individual or collective transformation more likely. Those terms are really important. Mutuality, meaning a back and forth in a relationship, not a one way. Um, there's some books and resources out that talk about passing on the faith, handing on the faith, handing down the faith. Um, I really don't like those metaphors because there's no mutuality. One person has the faith and is giving it to the other person, right? Mutuality is more about sharing faith, recognizing that both parties already have faith and can influence one another. There's equality, right? So we are all called to be disciples together. Yes, some are called to be teachers and leaders in specific ways, but we're all called to shape one another. And then there's reciprocity, which again is about that give and take, right? It's not just one group of people doing things for another group of people, but that we all give and receive the gifts of one another. And when we do that, both as individuals and as communities of faith, we're more likely to be transformed by the presence of people who are different than us. In this case, different because of their ages. I mentioned that this is one thing I like about these definitions is that it doesn't paint a picture of a either or, but of a spectrum with lots of points along the way. And churches are very complex, so even the churches that I might hold up in the next few minutes as examples of good intergenerational practice might be very multi-generational or still age-based in a lot of ways. And that's not wrong. That's not bad, but we shouldn't be all staying on that one side of generational segregation or age-based ministry. We should be pointed to moving to a more intergenerational approach. So I talked last time about a lot of terms, and I looked at scripture, and I looked at some theories. Today I'm going to build on that by looking at some very concrete examples of how churches have done some of this work. And we're going to start by looking at some steps. So I'm going to give you just a brief example of churches that have started to make the move from age-based to intergenerational. So if you're an age-based church wanting to move more multi-generational, meaning get people at least in the same room, you could be like this church, this United Methodist Church in Louisville, Kentucky, who is one of many churches that put together, what do they call them? Worship activity bags. And even you can even see one of them is for preschoolers, one's for elementary school. So even this is a little age-based, even though we're moving toward multi-generational. Um, there are all sorts of websites that can help you think about what to put in these kinds of bags. But essentially, they are things that help young people be present for worship service that still really isn't for them, right? Because if it was for them, then maybe it'd be the adults that need the activity bags, right? But the so you can even almost like see that term tolerance that was used about multi-generational, right? The worship bags make it easier for the children to tolerate being in a service that's really not for them, and the adults make it the bags make it easier for adults to tolerate having the children in the service without being as disruptive as they may be otherwise. So churches put all sorts of things in there. You know, a quick trip to Costco gives you a bumper crop of goldfish cracker bags, right? That could be a must-have. Usually things like coloring pages, sometimes fidget toys, which I would argue is good for everyone. I know churches that have fidgets for all ages, and more and more conferences and workshops I'm going to, there'll be fidgets for at the table, no matter what the age is. But different things that make it easier for people who need to move, who might get hungry, who need to do something, to have things to do during worship. So you can see it's a move to multi-generational. I would argue that the phenomenon of a playground is not intergenerational, but moving toward cross-generational. So a playground is essentially, there are all sorts of ways to do them. I've seen some that are wonderful. I've seen some that are not wonderful, to be kind. But at its best, they are spaces in worship in the sanctuary that are set aside for usually younger children and families to have a space where they can move, where they can play, um, but it's not frivolous and it's not happenstance. Like a colleague of mine was telling me about one where there was a child with a dump truck who just kept running the dump truck into one of the pews, and that's not very prayerful, right? A dump, So some of the best ones have very tactile worship things. I did one before I knew what a playground was. I had a prayer corner at one event that I did, where we talked a lot about the Good Shepherd, Jesus the Good Shepherd, and there were a lot of sheep stuffed animal and sheep toys, so you can kind of see how it connects a little more. It's not just let's throw some toys in the space. Some people use art for it, but especially for young kids, sometimes, yeah, you just need the baby bouncers and things like that. So the space is being changed, it's being transformed by the presence of the other, right? So it's moving more to cross generational. Here's an example of a church that is more intergenerational. And the way that they practice that is this is a church in Australia. They are obviously worshiping outside, and this is a worship service. So at some point in their service, they had people engage in the creative arts by responding, like I don't know the whole details, but likely responding to a biblical passage through art, and through working together to draw or paint or create something with art. That's something that, regardless of your skill, you can join together to do. So you can kind of see how the worship practices have been transformed to better accommodate. That's a key word in intergenerational circles, accommodation, right? They've been transformed to better accommodate those who are often overlooked in worship. And remember last time we watched those videos and we talked about outside of the church, the whole idea of intergenerational well-being came from the field of geriatrics, right? Recognizing that it's good for older people to be with younger people. But in the church, because it's often the younger people who are moved out of some of our key practices as churches, it's the other way around, where it's often the people who have been focused on children's and youth ministry that are moving into intergenerational ministry. So it's good for everyone. And it all depends on who you foreground and who you prioritize depends on who has not historically been prioritized in your context. So those are a couple, you can kind of see some examples of steps churches might take. Let's look at some different examples of some worship practices. And I'm not going to say where these are on the spectrum, because they're a little all over the place. But here's some examples of moving toward intergenerational worship or all age worship. This is an intergenerational message, a photo from an intergenerational message on Good Friday at St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. I think it's now Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish. At the time, it was St. Peter's. This is it's a church built in the round, and so what you are looking at is the stone altar. Well, that's all the altar table, and the circle around is the altar space as well. And so on this Good Friday, the leader invited all who are young at heart or young, whoever would like to come up to the front, and she told the story of the classic, Good Friday story of Jesus's betrayal and his arrest and crucifixion, and really focused on the Peter's action, right? What did Peter do? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. But it wasn't very long before that Peter was asking Jesus that very famous question, right? Jesus, how many times do we forgive someone, right? And he thought he was pretty good by saying probably 7 times, right? Seven's a good number. That's enough. And Jesus, of course, says not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times, which is 490 times, just showing that it goes on and on. So they had these heart post-it notes that you can just buy at Staples or Walmart, and she had counted out 490 of these. And anyone was invited to come to the front and grab a few, and they stuck them all over the altar to show the expansiveness of the forgiveness that Jesus shows us and that we're to show others. Connecting that story, that's not a traditional Good Friday story, but connecting it to the fact that the Peter who was asking about forgiveness was now the one who needed Jesus's forgiveness after betraying him, right? So a little bit of an unusual way of coming into Good Friday, but you can kind of see that there's that how this person took the typical sermon and made it something a little more interactive, something that is profound in meaning, but presented in a very simple way. A colleague of mine would say, some people talk about watering things down. Oh, we don't want to water things down for kids. And a colleague of mine in Indiana says, oh, no, we don't water things down. It's the opposite. We distill it, right? When you water down, you are adding something to it that's not necessary. When you distill something, you get rid of what isn't necessary to get that more pure essence, right? So that's what we do. We distill things down to their simplest parts that are still profound with meaning. This is another picture from this is from Australia. This is from a conference on intergenerational ministry, but a lot of churches that really try to bring the ages together look for ways that they can incorporate art into worship services. So in this case, some churches meet around tables. Some churches provide art, like have a designated spot where people can go to do artwork during it. But just having art materials available and encouraging people to use them either as an option or as something that everyone does for a few minutes or something like that is a really helpful way of moving toward all age ministry. Yeah, Jerry.
Thank you, David. This is so intriguing to me because 2 Sundays ago, our youth leaders took our youth and young adults to the park outside of the church where they, in anticipation of Earth Day, gathered pieces of the earth that they felt should be placed on a table
Mm-hmm.
and that congregants coming in on the following Sunday, on Earth Sunday, would be able to pick up something that they felt spoke to them. It could have been, and the children and the youth and young adults, there were leaves, there were rocks, there were chestnuts, there were acorns, there was just grass.
Mm-hmm.
It was the variety of what was selected by them as offerings to the congregation were considerable. And then the ministerial staff asked, as we entered, to take something from the table that either called to us or we were called to it.
That's great.
And because it meant something to you and you felt, and I picked up a chestnut. Now
Mm-hmm.
everybody had a different story, but early in the service, we were asked to take 5 minutes and turn to our neighbor and speak to them about what we selected
Yes.
and why we selected it.
Yes.
What a wonderful way of using the generations, using the theme of Earth Day and doing it in a way that was very tactile and very
Mm-hmm.
emotional. I picked up a chestnut and I shared with people that on Octoloni Street in King, in downtown Dartmouth many years ago, there were dozens of chestnut trees. And when my aunt used to live on King Street, and when I used to go visit her, I would always pick up chestnuts. And I was
Mm-hmm.
always intrigued by them because there were no chestnuts near where I lived. And so when
Mm-hmm.
I saw that chestnut, it just took me back to being an 8-year-old boy downtown Dartmouth visiting my family and the emotions that brought and the joy that that little
Yeah.
chestnut brought to me. So, and there were so many stories that were shared,
Yeah.
and what a wonderful way of interacting and intergenerationally doing something. And I was just it we had never done it previously. I
Mm.
just thought it was everybody downstairs at coffee time afterwards spoke about how meaningful the exercise was.
Yeah, thank you. What a great example. I
Yeah.
love that. And it shows it's simple but profound, right? And everyone is invited to engage with it in the same way, right? It doesn't matter whether you're 6 years old or 86 years old, right? You engage in the same way. Yes, the conversations and the memories and why people picked what they picked would be different, but that doesn't mean it's less meaningful. So, thank you. We're going to stick with nature for a minute, a little bit. This is a prayer practice called the gratitude tree, which is again, you can do a turn to your neighbor thing as well. You can do this individually or a turn to people around you. Also that turn to your neighbor stuff, if families are worshiping together, it's often a good way of engage of kind of overlapping family ministry and intergenerational ministry, right? That's the other thing that we often forget is when generations are split up in churches, it means families are also split up in churches. And so anyway, so this is a practice where you can buy on large website shopping stores named after rivers in South America. Um, you can make or purchase uh, cutout leaf shapes. They actually have this great kind of spring summer with different greens, and then they have an autumn version as well. And so everyone at worship at this service was given a leaf, and they all had a pen or a pencil, and there was a little string on the leaf, and they had prepared by someone had taken some tree branches, and you can't see it very well. A little bit at the bottom, maybe you can, but someone had wrapped twinkle lights around it to make it kind of more beautiful. And everyone was invited to write something that they're thankful for, something they'd like to thank God for, and then go up to the front or ask someone else to take. Some people movement might be a little more difficult. And so some people sent theirs with others, and other people brought theirs to the front and hang it on the tree. So you actually see a tree full of things that you're grateful for. And it's a way of embodying our prayers, not just with our words, but with our actions in a little more of a creative way. This is another
We
one.
had a
Oh,
gratitude tree for a few weeks back in, and it was sort of an offline thing where you just go,
mm,
there's this leaves that you could attach to the tr it actually was surprised put things that you're grateful for on there myself, but the people who were coming in for other activities in the church, like the yoga fit people and
that's amazing.
this and that, they and felt some of them felt they had to explain to me, and I was why they were putting it on. It was great. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, this is great. This is what this is for. I love that idea of taking it off, like, having it just be there for
Yeah,
people to engage with when they like. And it brings, as you said, it brings people into the practices of the church who might never come to worship but are still in the building, right?
yeah, and they
It's a way of almost
replaced
bringing worship to them in a little bit.
that. They took it away, and I was actually, but then they replaced it with a tree of chopped tomatoes, which was also successful. Anyway, I'll be
Yeah,
quiet now.
yeah. Here's another experiential prayer practice. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because I'm going to come back to it, but this uses Lego or Duplo bricks, and I'll explain this one a little bit more later. Some people are taking things that are made for a specific age group and making that the one moment in church in a worship service that is for all ages. So this is a guy named Jim Keat. Here he is at Middle Collegiate Church in New York. He's now at the Riverside Church in another church in New York City. And if you've ever been to a church that has children's messages or a children's talk or something like that, whatever, children's sermon, whatever it's called, or you've ever offered one, you might notice that some people say that they get more out of that than the actual sermon sometimes. And so, yeah, Ross is nodding, yeah. Um, so what Jim did is decide that if that's obviously if other people are listening to it, it's not just for the children. So he decided to make it a more interactive, engaging way of preaching that does not replace the regular sermon. It still comes after that, but replaces the children's talk with a time for everyone. So what he is doing here, I think, is um, leading everyone in a simple kind of exercise where you like flex your muscles or stretch or something like that, alongside some simple words about love. And he talks about how, love is a muscle that we need to stretch and we need to practice using in order for our love muscles to be very strong. And you can see that, well, even though the children are up at the front on the platform around him, everyone in the church is invited to be part of it. The children are just invited to get front row seats. This is a sermon I offered in Ottawa a few months ago, where I preached about Peter and Cornelius and how they needed one another in order for God to draw the circle of the church wider. And so after preaching for about 10 minutes on that in very simple language, everyone was given a square piece of paper with a little line on it and invited to draw or write something that symbolized them, right? Something that symbolized them. And then they had to find other people and make these circles. Just like Peter and Cornelius needed each other to draw the circle of the church wider, we needed one another on that day to make the circle of the church. And then we ended up making lots of circles. So just a way, again, it doesn't matter how good of a drawer you are. Everyone is invited to engage with it in the same way. And then people find each other. Sometimes it was a family who put theirs together. Other times people intentionally went as far away from where they were sitting in the sanctuary to find someone else to make their circle with. So you can see the message here is not just what I say, the message is what we're all doing together as well. This is a church in Scotland that has an intergenerational service once a month. And you can see here, this is how they're doing communion. Now, some churches' communion practices won't allow for this. That's fine. We have to work within the polity and the liturgical practices of our church and stretch them without breaking them. But they are from a tradition that you don't need to be ordained or to have special training to serve communion. So this is a young girl who is going around the circle serving everyone communion on that week. But some churches struggle with changing worship. It is the main thing we do as a church community, and some people find it difficult to jump right into all age ministry by going right to that core practice. So, some advice if changing worship is too much, look at special events and activities that are apart from worship. This is my church in Port Williams. Those are actually my kids at the front bottom from a year and a half ago. The first Sunday of Advent, for years, they have done an intergenerational Advent workshop where people sign up ahead of time to have a table with an activity. And that's all it is. For about an hour, people can move from table to table to table, doing whatever activity they want whenever they want. So there, my kids are being led in making their own Christmas crackers. The cookie decorating table is always a hit. And that becomes age-based because none of the adults push the kids out of the way, but they do patiently wait for their turns because all the adults want to make cookies too. There have been wreath making ones. There was one where everyone could have a candle and melt crayons because when the crayons melted, you can kind of decorate the candle with the melted wax. There's a card making one, or there was one where they had old cards and old sheet music and things like that, and you could cut it up and make Christmas ornaments out of it. So all sorts of different things. And it changes year to year depending on who wants to lead what. But it's very, oh, the thing is, it's not just the adults leading it. Um, for example, I'm pretty sure the card making one, it was a couple, I want to say like 10, 11, 12-year-olds who were leading that one, right? So everyone, you can engage with that outside of a worship service. Our church also does a games night. I mean, this is not very like exciting, but it is authentically intergenerational. There's always like a heated crokinole battle every games night. Um, but it's as simple as it sounds, right? There's no agenda, snacks, games, everyone's invited, and people can bring their games or they'll have games there. My friend Tracy, who we have a book of all age worship practices or all age church practices coming out in a couple months. Her husband is he's from Colombia, and he is a pastor of Dia Nuevo community in Illinois. It's a Spanish-speaking church, mostly made up of Venezuelan immigrants. They have a very large view of family and are very far from their families, their extended families. So once a month, they have a birthday party after worship for whoever's birthday is that month. And it's that simple. It's an all age practice. It doesn't matter whether you're turning 2 or you're turning 102. They sing happy birthday or feliz cumpleaños. There's cake, and that is it. So just something that happens after worship that brings everyone together in with equality, reciprocity. Some people do worship at an alternate time. So instead of changing like their Sunday morning worship service, this is an example of Messy Church, which is a very well-known now global phenomenon that focuses on all age and family-based worship, but often happening at a time apart from Sunday worship. Some churches do it every week on like a Sunday night. Some churches do it once a month on Fridays. So there's no one way to do it, but it still is worship. It just looks very different. And instead of changing the Sunday morning worship service, they find another time to worship. Some churches will do a different style of worship once in a while. So a friend of mine was involved in this church in England, and I think once a month, maybe once every couple months, they would do a cafe style service where they put out tables and they had coffee and juice and pastries and fruit, and worship was a little more casual. And when my friend would preach, he would only speak for maybe 4 or 5 minutes. And the point was to lead up, give a little context to the passage that he's preaching on, and then ask a question. And then he kind of gave it to the tables, and the sermon transpired as all the tables sat talking about that question together. So that might not work in a regular run-of-the-mill service, but once in a while they would do this cafe style service occasionally. There are also services that are kind of primed to be different because they're already different. I'm going back to that first example at the Catholic Church in Dartmouth. I know some Catholic colleagues who are changing worship so that it's more intergenerational or more all age inclusive. But the higher one's liturgy, the more difficult that tends to be because the liturgy is set. Now, that being said, set liturgies are often more interactive to begin with. So they do have that advantage going for them. Anyway, the reason I'm sharing this as an example again is because I mentioned earlier that this was a Good Friday service. And one of the things in the Catholic Church is that Good Friday is churches will usually have some sort of service, but it's not a mass. It's not a mass. So suddenly you can break free from the barrier or the confines of the set liturgy and do things in very different ways. So it is a worshipful service. It's a worship service, but not a mass with the Eucharist. So it's already something that's out of the ordinary. I know churches that have done things on World Communion Sunday or um, the Day of Prayer for Christian Unity or Earth Day. Jerry, you just gave that example. Like these are things that are already a little bit out of the ordinary. And so you can, push the boundaries a little bit more and do some different things. Whatever you do, though, I want to go through a couple assumptions that I find really helpful for grounding what what our practices can look like. First, as I mentioned about that spectrum, the movement toward intergenerational ministry is a direction, not a destination. I think the most difficult thing a church can do is think they've arrived, right? And that is because this is a matter, at its heart, this is a matter of justice and power. And so, just like, for example, the United Church made a commitment 20 years ago to becoming intercultural, they will never be intercultural, right? The human dynamics and cultural dynamics of just human life are part of the church for better or for worse. And power will always remain stronger in certain people's hands, whether because of culture or sexual orientation or age or language. So, as much as we all might work together to make churches that are more inclusive, more justice oriented, we do so knowing that we will never arrive there, at least not this side of heaven, right? So this is another example of that, right? It's a direction, not a destination. The other thing is that doing something is better than doing nothing. Some people would say, well, we can't change everything in our worship service. Well, then don't. But don't do nothing. Try one thing once, one small practice once and see what happens, right? So we don't need to transform and adapt absolutely everything that we're doing all at once or even ever. But doing nothing is not as good as doing one thing, one small thing. Another thing is that all age doesn't necessarily mean every age. And what I mean by that is some churches will often say, well, we don't have any kids at our church, so this isn't necessarily for us. And whether even if you have a 55-year-old and an 85-year-old, those people are from different generations. They have different ways of thinking, they have different values, different ways of perceiving the world. And so all age doesn't mean every age. All age really means all the ages who are there or who may show up, right? But it doesn't mean you have to have every age group or every generation present to do this kind of thing, right? We often think about how it's really for the children, but if it's truly all age, we should be able to do this stuff even if there are no children there, right? Because it's for everyone. It's not a silver bullet, it's not a quick fix. It doesn't mean your church is going to grow numerically. It doesn't mean you're suddenly going to have the young families flocking into your church. This is not a church growth strategy, but what it is a spiritual growth strategy and a relational growth strategy. But it is not about growing your church numerically. It takes a lot of intentional work. My colleague Tracy talks about how these things are simple, but they're not easy. So it takes hard work. You have to work at this kind of thing, but it doesn't have to be difficult. But it does take work to do this. You have to make the intentional steps to have this happen, because everything about how we've done church for so long and how society is structured outside the church pulls us back into an age-based model. And so we have to continually and intentionally work against that. It's very messy and unpredictable. It involves giving control to everyone who was there, right? I say it doesn't mean pastors and preachers and worship leaders give up control. What it means is they give up the illusion that they had the control in the first place. Because really, it's the Spirit who has the control, and each person there who engages with worship and with preaching in their own way. So when we give up control or the illusion of control, we we put at the forefront of our mind that we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, Jerry.
Number six is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm not quite successful yet with folks at my church, but I continue to work on it.
Good.
I look at the format of our Sunday services, and if one were to walk in 15 minutes into the service, we know exactly where we'd be walking in and what would be
Mm,
happening at that time. We tend to become formatted. I call it the CTV or CBC news format, where everything is done each newscast in exactly the same format,
right.
and the weather comes on at a certain time and the coloring contest is on at a certain time. And I've shared with our worship team how beneficial I believe it could be to be unpredictable. Now, to be predictable in your unpredictability, in as much as the worship team changing the format of a Sunday service from time to time and opening with children's moment as opposed to
Mm, mm,
something else, and being very intentional about not being so predictable.
hmm.
Anyway, I don't
Yes.
know for what that's worth. That number six is one that I feel I've yet to have influence in. I'm only one voice. I may never get my influence, but I
Well,
I,
keep saying it.
I
I
do
think
believe we need to be a little more spontaneous at times, and even if that is structured and formatted.
right. And yes, I appreciate that we don't throw the whole format away because there are certain people, especially people who might be neurodiverse or neurospicy,
Hmm.
that really need the structure and the format.
Yes.
People who are often also dealing with trauma need to know what's happening ahead of time, right?
Hmm.
They might struggle with too much unpredictability. But
Yes.
even if we, as you say, even if we follow the format, when we engage in more interactive approaches, more participatory approaches, when we're sharing the power, we don't know what's going to happen, right?
Right.
We don't know how people are going to engage with it. So even in that way, it's messy and unpredictable. It's also it's really for everyone, right? All age means all age. Doesn't matter who's there. And this is where it really overlaps with all abilities, with different cultures. So in the Venn diagram of different ways that, the diversity of diversities in our church, age diversity is just one, and it can often be an on-ramp to engaging other types of diversity as well. And finally, whether you are a big church or a small church, every church is going to have certain things that are inherently a strength to that make this easier, and some things that are going to be more challenging. I tend to think that small churches have a little bit more of an advantage than large churches because of things like child protection policies um, in much larger churches, and the fact that the larger a church is, the more work those churches do to not feel like they're a large church, right? So that's where they might have small groups, or they might have like a college and career group, or age-based Sunday school and things like that. So the smaller a church is, the more like the like South Street Church I said last week, right? They kind of accidentally became intergenerational because they became so small that the age-based stuff they used to do just wasn't working anymore because they didn't have enough people to split apart into different ages. So churches of all sizes and shapes have different strengths and challenges. Um, I think this is a good time to take a bit of a break. I have 7:46, so I'm going to what's a normal break, Ross? 10 minutes? Something like that?
10 minutes is good.
10 minutes is good. Okay. It's turned to 47. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start back up at the hour because would like you to take a break, but I'm also going to give you something to do. Because if we were together, I would just provide all of these things for you. But what I would like you to do on the break is find four things, if you can. If you can, we'll get creative. See if you can find a blank piece of paper, or a blank note card would be even better. Um, a pen or a pencil, something to color with or draw with, markers, pencil crayons, something. And the bonus, the icing on the cake, or the cherry on the icing, is if you have some stickers. Okay? So, blank note card or piece of paper, pen or pencil, some markers or pencil crayons, and if you have stickers, That would just be amazing. I wish I could provide you all with a book of stickers. And then we'll come back together at the hour because we're going to actually see what we can do through Zoom with our small group here to actually not just talk about some of these things, but to try some out for ourselves.
All right, then.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Let's give it another minute. Oh
Oops.
no. Did we lose? We lost someone.
We lost Neil entirely.
Shall we give it another minute? See if he comes back.
We'll see if he's coming back. There he is.
All right, so you can see the image there, the slide there.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, so we're going to do some experiments. I always call these experiments because we don't know what's going to happen, and even if they're a failure, um, all the results are valid as long as we learn from them. And I don't normally, this is stuff I tend to do more in person and with larger groups. So this is especially experimental, but I want to give you a little bit of a flavor of a number of different practices for worshiping with all ages. The first, some of it doesn't need to be that different than what we do. Do some of you do calls to worship in your churches?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what is that? It often, in my experience, it often looks like there's something written that the worship leader or the pastor says, and then something written that everyone else says.
Yep.
So one of the challenges with that is it assumes everyone can read English, right? And some people can't for different reasons. So a simple way of moving into worshiping with all ages is to gather through just a call to worship that involves repeated elements. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is a simple call to worship using repeated elements. So the tonight's call to worship uses the phrase, "This is the day that God has made." So I'm going to say some other words, but every time I lift my arms, I would invite all of you, oh, and please keep your take your put your microphones on, put yourself off mute. So every time I lift my arms, you say, "This is the day that God has made." Okay? Let's try it.
This
This
is
is
the
the
day that God has made.
Great. We come to worship as we do each week, saying,
This
this
is the
is the
day
day
God
God,
has
is
made.
made.
whether we're happy or sad or tired or angry,
this is the
This
day.
is the day that God is made.
we bring our full attention to worship God because,
This
This
is
This
is the
is the
day
day
that God
God
is made.
has
Great. Amen. Let's read some scripture together. I'm not going to do any songs. Not I won't do any examples of singing tonight. But let's see how this how this works. Oh, there. See? Oh, and I did have it. For those who can read, there it was. But for those who can't, it's simple enough that we can all remember it. So this is the first practice is going to be highly experimental. It works really well with larger groups, 20 or more, but we'll just pretend. We're going to represent all those who are not here today. So we are going to divide into, I need you to divide into three groups. So I'm just going to go based on where you are on my screen. So Ross and Bill, I'm going to invite you to be group one, which is you are the W group. You'll see what that means in a minute. Jerry, you're going to be a group to yourself. You're going to be the S group. And Neil, you're going to be the H group. So you need to take yourself off of mute because I'm not going to read this by myself. Anytime there is a word that starts with W, it's in red. And Ross and Bill, you're going to say those words emphatically, not me. You're going to say them. And we'll see how this works with Zoom and legs and glitches and all that. Jerry, you're the S words. So anytime there's a word that starts with S, it's blue. You're going to say that emphatically. And Neil, you're the H words.
Got
Okay?
it.
Bill, you're still on mute.
Yeah. I need your help on this, Bill.
Okay, so
Uh,
we both say it together?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. If we were 50 people, then there'd be like 15 or 20 per word. But this is the group the Lord has made, and we will be happy and rejoice in it. Um, all right, so I will leave it to the W group to start off.
When the
Ed.
The day of Pentecost came. Oh, sorry. What the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place.
Suddenly,
Ah,
sound
like the blowing of a violent
wind,
came from
Heaven,
and filled the
hole,
house,
where,
Where?
they
were,
Where?
sitting,
th- they
saw,
what,
What?
seemed
to be tongues of fire that
separated,
and came to rest on each of them. All of them
were,
Were
filled
with,
with
the
holy,
spirit,
and began to
speak,
in other tongues as the
spirit,
enabled them. Now there
we
were
were,
staying,
in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under
heaven,
when they
when,
oh sorry they
heard,
this
sound,
a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one
heard,
their own language being
spoken,
utterly amazed they asked aren't all these
who
who,
are
speaking,
Galileans? Then
how,
is it that each of us them in our native language. Now, this is the part that's not fair to give anyone sight unseen. Parthians, Medites, and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya near the Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs,
we,
we
hear,
them declaring the
wonder
wonders,
of God in our own tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another,
what,
what?
does this mean?
some
heard,
Made fun of them, and
said,
they,
have, had,
too much.
wine.
wine,
Wine is always the most emphatic word
Yeah.
whenever you do this. This is a practice from a friend of mine named Beth Waldron Anstis, who kind of took the idea. You can do this with all sorts of different passages, but it works really well with this one because it kind of echoes it or pays homage to the chaos of the sounds that people would have heard that day in when
yes.
in Acts 2 recounts it.
Oh, wow.
This is another practice by the same person, by Beth. Anytime there's a word in pink, it refers to someone, and I need everyone in our congregation, all four of you. At the same time, anytime I say one of the words in pink, you are going to say, who? Like you really don't know. Who? Okay.
Okay.
So this is from Mark. Whoops. I have too many screens open. Sorry. Okay, sorry, give me a moment. Okay. This is from Mark 8:27 to 30. Jesus,
Who?
Who?
he's the one who God sent to save the world and show us how to live. He and his disciples,
Who?
Who?
Disciple? Who?
they're a group of people from all walks of life who came together to follow Jesus. They went to the villages near the town of Caesarea Philippi, and as they were along, he asked them, "What do people say about me?" The disciples,
Who?
Who?
I just told you, they're the group of people who were learning, came together to learn what it means to follow the way of life Jesus was showing them. They answered, "Some say you are John the Baptist."
Who?
Who?
That was Jesus' cousin who foretold of his coming. Or maybe Elijah.
Who?
Who?
Elijah was a major prophet of the Hebrew Bible that some people thought he was going to return to earth one day. Others say you are one of the prophets.
Who?
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 They're people that God chose to help to help people turn toward God's ways. Then Jesus,
Who?
Who?
I told you this already too. Jesus is the Son of God who came to earth to save the world and show us how to live. He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" You are the Messiah,
Who?
Who?
the one that God sent to rescue God's people. Peter,
Who?
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 a very important person among Jesus' followers, replied, "Jesus,
Who?
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 God's only son, the one that God sent to save us and show us how to live." He warned the disciples,
Who?
Who?
like the same people I told you about earlier. They got together and followed Jesus to learn how to live like him. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. So, another kind of fun way, especially because there's a lot of little pieces in this
Yes.
that we might not know. Like when you hear some say John the Baptist or Elijah, we don't always realize, like, what does that mean that people think? Why would someone think you're Elijah, Jesus, right? And so you're just quickly reminded. It's because some people thought he was going to come back. This is a really playful way of reading the Bible. Anytime you can do it with Jesus calming the storm when there's winds and waves. This one has sheep. Anytime I say the word sheep,
Ah.
you got it, Bill. I don't even need to give the instructions. You're all experts. You just make the sound a sheep makes. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep.
Bah.
Uh,
The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep
Bah.
uh,
hear his voice. He calls his own sheep
Bah.
uh,
by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep
Bah.
follow him because they hear his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep.
Bah.
Great. You might feel a little silly doing that,
No.
but well, and even if you do, it's okay because one of the big principles that is important is that we recognize that whenever bringing people who are different together in worship, we do things, that word accommodation, right? We change what we do for the sake of other people. I often talk about actions. We're not going to do actions tonight. I don't like actions. I sometimes lead them. More often, I'm like, we'll be at AST. Ross can attest to this. We'll be at AST, and someone will, especially in the summer students love actions in songs. And it's just not me. But you know what? I love that other people love them. And I
Mm.
love that I can worship in a place where other people who love doing them will do them. But it doesn't mean I have to do them. But sometimes, if I'm leading worship for an all age service, I will lead actions. As much as I feel a little silly about it, and as much as it's not something that really connects with me, I do it for the sake of one another, right?
Mm.
And that's one
Dave,
of another principle to keep in mind.
hi, Dave.
Hi.
I have a difficulty with movement and the same sort of idea of doing that in service. But when the liturgical people came and did their dance at our church,
Mm.
it's a real inspiration in movement, and I've just really just put the two together, and I thought, wow, that's
Wow.
really cool. And I've come up with this morning movement prayer, and it's really very simple, but it's the when you sing, you're in harmony with other people.
Mm.
When you move the body in the same way, it's just like using the voice in to be in harmony. And so when you're moving the body in a certain way to praise God, you're amplifying what you're saying. So
I love that.
I do think it does reinforce people when you have movement. And
Hmm.
I can appreciate that for some people it is, you know, not their thing.
Right. But as I said, I'm happy to be in spaces where people who it is their thing get to do it. And
Mm.
I'm glad that they stretch me. I'm glad that they stretch me, right? One of the big challenges to worship and to changing worship for whatever reason is the consumeristic, individualistic way that we often engage worship. We go because we like it. No, no, we go to worship God, right? And sometimes we hear sermons that are hard to hear, but we need to hear. Sometimes we engage in worship practices that we might not like, or we're invited to engage in practices that we might not like, that might not touch us in the same way, but might be very important to someone else. But I'm glad you mentioned movement because I am going to invite you to move this next one. This next one is up and down. Colossians, up and down. Anytime you hear I'm not going to have it on screen. You just listen. Anytime you hear the word up, I would invite you to put your hands in the air. Anytime you hear the word down, put your hands down. If we were in church, I would invite people to use their bodies any way they want. Stand up, put your hands up, look up, whatever. But since we're all at our screens, we'll just do our hands. This is Colossians 1, 1 to 14. Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother, to the saints and faithful brothers and sisters in Christ in Colossae. Grace and peace to you from God our Father. We thank God always when we lift up prayers to the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, for we have heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and the love that you have deep down in your heart for all the saints because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. I like it, Neil.
I'm,
You have heard
I'm a
this.
rebel.
Well, this is the thing. The digital technology can't do this in analog, right? You can't. You have heard of this hope before you in the word of truth, the gospel that has come down to you. Just as it is bearing fruit and growing in the whole world, so it has been bearing fruit among yourselves from the day you heard it and truly comprehended the grace of God. You heard it from Epaphras, our beloved fellow servant. He is a faithful minister of Christ on our behalf, and he brought your love in the Spirit up to our attention. For this reason, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased to kneel down and pray for you, and asking that you may be filled up with the knowledge of God's will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, as you bear fruit in every good work, and as you grow in the knowledge of God. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes down from his glorious power, so that you may have all endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has lifted you up to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has come down to rescue us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to
Be to
God.
God.
Now, I did paraphrase that a little bit, so there were more ups and downs. There's another one I like doing from Acts 2. Um, no, I'm sorry, Acts 10. It's that Peter Cornelius story. And no one really knows you're paraphrasing until you get to the part where you say, but Peter then said, I'm not down with that, God. We're told not to eat those kinds of food. And then people start realizing, this is a paraphrase.
Okay.
Anyway, let me offer a short message to show you different ways that preaching can become all ages. And I want to start this message by telling you that I love getting mail. I really love getting mail. Now, my wife loves it even more than me. But I don't mean utility bills or flyers with the latest Canadian Tire sale. I love opening my mailbox and seeing a greeting card from a family member or a letter from a friend that's waiting for me. Because from the time I moved out of my family's home when I was 18, my father has been a constant source of greeting cards. I always know right away if a card is from him because he puts stickers all over it, all over the envelope. There are always some dog stickers, but lately they've been accompanied by penguins and some Winnie the Pooh and Ninja Turtle stickers. And often the stickers are part of an inside joke or a story between us, or maybe whatever my kids are into these days. And the best cards that I get are the ones that are unexpected. Every once in a while, I receive a card from my dad that he sends just because. Sometimes it's after a trip we took together and he's thinking of the memories of it. At other times, it's because he found a funny card that he knew I would get a charge out of, to use his words. The messages he writes inside are never long. Things like thinking of you, hope you have a great day, I knew you'd like this card. But they make me feel great because there's no reason for him to send these cards other than to remind me that he's thinking of me and that he cares. Now, before I go further, I want to admit that I did not write today's message alone. A while back, I was teaching a course about preaching at AST, and there were students in the course ranging in age from their early 20s to, was probably more respectful not to wager a guess at what some of their ages were. It was certainly an intergenerational group of students, and we didn't have all generations represented, but definitely 3 or 4 at least. And I also think collaboration is really important in the church, especially with things like preaching, when it's way too easy to think of it as one person talking while everyone else listens. So I knew I was going to be preaching at my home church in the coming week. And so I thought it'd be a good time to introduce both my students and my class and my church to some collaborative, intergenerational aspects of preaching. So I invited my students to help me write the sermon by reflecting on the passage that we just heard from Colossians, which was the lectionary passage for the coming week. And then they broke into small groups and shared their ideas about what the passage meant with one another. And I listened carefully and incorporated some of their ideas into this message, which was originally written for my home church. Now, some of the students were very helpful in pointing out that